And we are recording on Monday, October 21st, 2022 at 10:22 a.m. Eastern Time. It's a lot of twos. And today with Mr. Joseph Sweeney, and we were talking about your book, Dangerous Injustice. And that link is in the description. It was an awesome book, and I'm literally have clinical OCD, and I love all things like hierarchy. So you were speaking to my soul when you're talking about skiffs and layers and layers and layers. I was like, I need this. And but yeah, no, I mean what it really is, and I thought it was pertinent how in the book you're going into how this is violent rhetoric, and then you can see where you put in like a post edit, and it was like just before this book is going to print, they just shot Donald Trump. So pretty prophetic. But again, for everyone listening, the link to the book is in the description. It is a great read. I think it lays out exactly what is going on. I mean, from the headaches of overclassifying to the I never knew that all classification is technically the president's. Like they can do anything. They can, like you said, Joe Biden can just throw a bunch of TSSCI documents on the beach at Rehoboth, and it's not illegal. And I didn't know that. I didn't realize just how much, I guess, there is kind of an American king, for lack of a better word. But Mr. Sweeney, will you please introduce yourself to everyone because you have quite the background?
Sure. My name is Joe Sweeney, and I have 35 years in federal government. I did 10 years in the U.S. Army, four at West Point, graduated in 1987. Then I did 6 years as an airborne ranger qualified infantry officer, most of that time in the 10th Mountain Division. I got out of the Army in 93, went to Vermont Law School from 93 to 96. And upon my graduation, I was accepted into what was called the CIA National Security Law Honors Program. That's how the agency hired people right out of law school. And so then I spent the next 25 years of my life as a lawyer for the CIA, working with classified information almost every day. And my career at this in the CIA General Counsel's office was somewhat unique because I spent about half my time assigned to operational components within the Directorate for Operations. And then the other half of my time, I spent in the litigation division of the CIA General Counsel's office. And it's unusual for any attorney to spend that much time, but I enjoyed the work. So I served in the litigation division as a line attorney, as a deputy, as an acting chief, and then as a chief for around 4 years. And so, because I spent that much time in national security litigation, I handled hundreds, thousands of cases, civil and criminal, high profile criminal prosecutions that involve classified information in some way, shape, or form. And so developed an expertise in that area that is pretty much unparalleled just by chance.
Hmm.
And one of the categories of criminal prosecutions that I developed expertise in was prosecutions under the Espionage Act. And those cases cover a pretty broad spectrum from the type of thing you would see in the movies,
Hmm.
right? Where foreigners get caught stealing our classified information, or some of our own employees get caught, selling classified information to the Russians or the North Koreans. That's kind of classic spying.
Yeah.
But the Espionage Act also covers things such as gross negligence in the handling of classified information. So even if people just make mistakes and they're really bad mistakes, they can be prosecuted. Also, people who take classified information and willfully retain it. So, for instance, even if you don't intend to sell secrets to the Russians, maybe you just take them because you're a hoarder and you think they're
Yeah.
cool. That happens, and people take classified home and they keep it, and that is also against the law under the Espionage Act. So it's a broad spectrum of cases and types of conduct that are criminalized by the Espionage Act, and I've worked on that full range of cases throughout my career.
Hmm. Yeah, it's I think it's important that you kind of for I don't know where I heard the phrase, but I heard it forever ago. It's seeing like some guy talking about, when people fall in love and it's infatuation, and then, then you start to then like, people that are married for 50 years, it's like they know everything and that, everyone's flaws. But it calls it you see their clay feet, which I guess is like I guess I don't know if it's a if it's a phrase or whatever. It kind of brings it down to size, and I think it's important because it's like I was pre-med in college, and I remember I had to shadow doctors at near UGA, University of Georgia. And in your mind, you have them on this pedestal. It's like because they got into med school, they got the resident, like they're the top of the top, and you'd be there at 8 a.m. or something, and they'd come in and you'd see them like wiping their eyes, and one of them be like, they come in and you'd be like, dude, I had like the worst shit this morning, and you're gonna look at him, you're like, wait, what? Because you're 20, you're trying to get into med school, and here's this guy who's like the orthopedic surgeon, and he's just like, dude, I'm so excited. It's Friday. I'm getting so fucked up tonight. And you'd be like, what? But in a way, you start to appreciate it more because you see them as humans. And so my point of saying all that is you go into it and you talk about like overclassification and like a lunch memo could be classified. And I think you said you're standing there sweating because you don't know what file to put something in. So I think it's important to understand that it's not all Tom Clancy. Who's the FBI guy? Hansen, the guy that ended up in ADX Florence. It's
Hanson.
it's not all dead drops, and it does happen. I think there's another guy in ADX Florence who sold blueprints for the B2 Spirits propulsion system back in the 90s. There are things where it's like, yeah, no, that is kind of like thriller movie, and like those guys should rot in prison. But then there's other shit where you're like, is this classified? Like, is this not classified? What do I do? So I think that full spectrum kind of brings it down to like there are mistakes. People do make mistakes, and it's not always, it is sometimes, but it's not always trench coat, fedora, giving some, handing over some blueprints to some guy at the Lithuanian, ambassador to the Soviet Union or
Right,
something,
right.
right? But
Yeah, and
yeah,
I don't go into great detail on this in my book, but I do
mhm.
say there are many instances where people just make honest mistakes,
Sure.
and those are handled as security violations. I've had them. I'd leave at the end of the night. I worked an 18-hour day, and I forget to spin the dial on the vault to lock the
Yeah,
vault that I work in. That's happened to me. And you get in the next morning, and whoever opened the vault says, Joe, you were clearly on the sign out sheet last night. You didn't lock the vault. You got to go report to the security officer. And then you get, either a verbal reprimand or a written reprimand. Those things happen
sure.
because we're all human. But the big cases, if the government's taking time to prosecute someone, it's usually because there's more egregious conduct, right? It's something much more than a security violation, usually. And I've worked on all those types of cases because among other things, I served as a lawyer for the Counterintelligence Center and the Counterespionage Group. We did investigations of our own people. And sometimes, you're trying to figure out, was this an honest mistake or was there something more going on? And that takes investigation. And
Mm.
so I don't spend a lot of time on the security violations, but they happen. And the cases I ended up working on, because I had spent so much time in the litigation division, were the cases where high ranking government officials had done something much more egregious than just a security violation. Now, there's only 4 of those cases in US history, and I worked on 3 of them. They were 2 of them were directors of the CIA, John Deutsch, and more recently, David Petraeus.
Uh-huh.
Then, then there was also the Sandy Berger case. Sandy Berger was Clinton's national security advisor. And then, of course, the one everyone knows, Hillary Clinton's case.
Hmm.
And I'm one of the few people in the world who has read the fabled Clinton emails because I participated in the classification review.
And you
Um,
are not suicidal for the
I
record.
am not
He's got a
suicidal.
big
And
smile on
isn't
his
it funny?
face. He's got,
You know where to look.
yeah. Yeah, I know exactly. Sorry, keep going.
So yeah, for your listeners and viewers, I'll just throw out a few of the facts for these historical cases. Each one of them is fascinating in their own right. There's interesting, kind of human interest stories wrapped in with the prosecutions, but I'll just go through them briefly to kind of set a baseline for how the government historically had handled these types of cases where the high-ranking people get caught doing something egregious. The first case was in 1996, and that was John Deutsch. who was Clinton's director of Central Intelligence. And at the end of his term, when he was moving on, he had to return some unclassified CIA computers that had been loaned to him for his use at home. And when they were turned in, there was a security review done, and they found over 300 classified documents, some of them highly classified, on Deutsch's home computer that was hooked up to the internet and had no security protocols whatsoever. So, in government parlance, that was an unsecured computer. Um, so, there's a long story on this, and I encourage your folks to read the book. But the bottom line is Deutsch gets caught with all this classified information. He tried to destroy a lot of it before returning the computers. Normally DOJ calls that obstruction of justice. That's a 5-year felony right there. But in his case, he ended up signing a plea agreement for a misdemeanor for one single secret document. Now, he had hundreds and hundreds, and many of them were top secret. But DOJ went leniently on him because he was a senior person, and they charged him with one single document at the secret level. And for your folks at home, the way classification works is there's confidential, and then secret, and then top secret. Depending on the level of damage, anticipated damage from unauthorized disclosure, there's a higher level classification. So even though he had top secret, he was only charged with one secret document. And he got a fine and a misdemeanor and probation under his plea agreement. Then the next day, Clinton pardoned him. Because the next day was Clinton's last day in office. So Deutsch never even had to pay a fine, and he didn't even get the probation. And his pardon, it was one of the last pardons Clinton handed down. It was 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, just as he was departing the White House. And it never got any publicity. It didn't get publicity because the other pardon that Clinton handed down that morning was to a guy named Mark Rich, who had been on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, was a fugitive from justice because he had been indicted in the Southern District of New York when he fled the country. Now, that pardon was given after Mark Rich's wife, Denise, donated $1 million to the Democratic National Committee, $450,000 to the Clinton Library, and $100,000 to Hillary Clinton's Senate run. That was the Mark Rich pardon. And because of those, yeah, hard to believe. It all happened. It's all on the public record. And so that permitted kind of Deutsch to slide under the radar because Mark Rich, of course, got all the publicity. So that was the first case. And the second case was someone else who worked for Clinton, the National Security Advisor, Sandy Berger. Well, after Berger was done serving his time as National Security Advisor, and this was after 9/11, the 9/11 committee had subpoenaed some of Clinton's presidential records from the National Archives to review as part of their work. And Berger was doing a privilege review for Clinton, for former President Clinton at the time. So he's going to the National Archives. He's getting access to top secret presidential records and stealing them. He was stuffing them down his pants and in his socks and taking them home and destroying them. And as far as the government could tell, it was the same version, different draft versions of the same document, which was a counterterrorism after action review. Now, that's all we know from the public record. And this is the one case that I did not personally work on. But there was a rumor going around Washington at the time that what Berger was destroying was a document that showed that the Clinton administration had the opportunity to kill Osama bin Laden before 9/11, and they decided not to do that because they were concerned about appearance issues. And so that was Berger's conduct. Now, Berger was also the case was resolved through a plea agreement and for a fine and probation, and it just had a generic reference to the classified information. Now, Berger had destroyed evidence. He had lied to the FBI. They didn't charge him with any of those crimes at all. And he got a misdemeanor charge with a fine and a probation. So just a little slap on the wrist. This is unbelievable, but it's true. It's right in the documents. He only lost his security clearance for 3 years. I can tell you, any other person in the executive branch would never, ever get a security clearance again, and it would have been revoked permanently. But that was in the plea agreement. After 3 years, he was allowed to apply for a security clearance again. And during the 3 years, it also explicitly said that if the government wanted him to have a clearance, renew his clearance. So really unbelievable and unbelievably lenient. Um, so that was the second case. The third case was David Petraeus, also a director of the CIA. This was underneath Obama. He was an Obama appointee. It's a sad, sordid tale with Petraeus because he was having an affair with his biographer, Paula Broadwell, and as part of that relationship, he gave her access to classified documents that he was retaining. He had kept at his home 8 highly classified notebooks of just his notes throughout his government service. And this was top secret level stuff. And he had loaned some of it to his biographer to assist her in writing his book. And so, or the book about him. This is a crazy story, but the biographer mistress got jealous of another third woman who was, spending too much time with Petraeus and started sending her anonymous threatening emails. You stay away from David Petraeus or else, that kind of stuff. And so she reported it to the FBI, this third woman, and the FBI, followed the IP address back to Paula Broadwell's house and raided her house. And when they got in there, what did they find? Classified documents from Petraeus. And then they went and interviewed Petraeus, and he denied giving those documents to her, which is called a false official statement. That's a felony, 5 years in jail. They never charged him with that. Once again, like all the other precedents, Petraeus's case came down to a plea agreement, misdemeanor, and probation. That was it. So again, handled, little tap on the wrist, very light prosecution. Now, the last case, Hillary Clinton's case, and again, I encourage your viewers to read the book because there's too much detail for me to get into here, but I'll just summarize it and refresh people's recollections. When Clinton was Secretary of State, she arranged for a server to be set up in her home that would capture all of her government-related emails, which is a big-time bozo no-no in the government. That's basically stealing government documents. And then there's also no historical record, right? It's supposed to be maintained under the Federal Records Act. So when this came to light is when Clinton was running for president against Trump. And so the FBI, which was controlled by the Obama administration at the time, right? And so it's a highly unusual situation where a Democratic administration is doing a criminal investigation of the Democratic Party candidate for president. Yeah. And what they did is probably, up until Biden's case, the most biased investigation in the history of the United States government. They permitted Clinton's lawyers to do the searches of what emails were going to be returned to the government. The FBI never served her, never, served any kind of subpoena or search warrant. There was no criminal compulsion. They never even took the hard drives. And so everything was left up to Clinton's people. Now, there was no doubt that those emails were going to contain classified information. Clinton's lawyers didn't even have security clearances, which means the FBI actually facilitated an additional crime by giving these people access to classified information, which anyone could have seen would be in there. And so there was no legal compulsion, right? No grand jury that we could see. Comey was kind of vague on that point, but there was certainly no search warrant, no subpoenas. They did not compel people to testify like they would normally do in cases. And so it was just handled very leniently. And again, I encourage your folks to read the book and see the details because they're shocking of how biased an investigation it was. So as a result of all that, excuse me.
You're good, man.
FBI Director Comey held a press conference and basically said no reasonable prosecutor could prosecute Clinton based on what they found. And he stated that she was extremely careless with classified information, but not grossly negligent, even though those terms are synonymous. And they had found, according to Comey's press conference, 110 classified emails in all that Clinton had. I can tell you from participating in the classification review, the number was likely much higher, probably in the thousands. And in fact, in that press conference, which you can still see on the internet, Comey says that there were about 2,000 emails that were up classified. In other words, they weren't classified when they were sent, but the review found them to be classified later. The implication for what he was saying was that the emails were not classified when they were sent, but because of a change in whatever world events, now about 2,000 of them were found to be classified upon review. I think that was a bunch of BS. I think what he was really doing is hiding the fact that there were thousands that were classified when they were sent. And having participated in the process with the State Department people, this is kind of what I saw, that they were trying to downgrade information so as to avoid embarrassment or to either the department or to Clinton. But there was a much larger volume probably, and any reasonable person could see that. I mean, what was reported was that around 30,000 of the emails were government records. Well, Clinton was the Secretary of State, and one of the reasons you classify information, it's right in the executive order, is the foreign affairs of the United States. And so if it was only 110, that comes down to like 0.33% of the Secretary of State's emails that were classified. And that's just not believable.
No.
Of course, it's going to be a higher number than 1/3 of 1%, when one of the reasons you classify information is for the foreign affairs of the United States. So anyway, so as a result of all that, nothing happened to Clinton. She wasn't charged at all. Nothing, even though her conduct was at a minimum grossly negligent with the handling of classified information. But it was likely there was probably also a good case for her willful retention, because anyone at her level of government would have known that their emails, their work emails, were going to contain classified information. So there was a lot more nefarious conduct in the Clinton investigation. That's good enough just to set a baseline. So there you have the four historical cases, and one of the commonalities for all of them is that they were all senior members of the Democratic Party. So they were all senior Democrats, and they were all treated incredibly lenient by the criminal justice system. That's the precedence. Then I had been retired for about 1 year. I'd done 25 years at the CIA. I retired in July of 2021. And then it was 8th of August, 2022, that the FBI raided Mar-a-Lago. Now, in addition to having, been probably the only person in history, the only person in the entire government who had worked on 3 of the 4 precedents where senior government officials had mishandled classified information, I'm also a student of American history, always have been. And so I am fascinated by this raid. And I've got the time to look into it because I'm retired, and I've got the experience to understand what I'm seeing. Now, I start digging into the raid, and I could not believe what I found. With every rock that I turned over, I found more and more malfeasance by the Biden administration, where they were bending over backwards to misinterpret laws, to apply laws in ways they'd never been used before, just to get Trump. And while I'm researching this and writing it, Biden gets caught with classified information. So then I start doing a deep dive on his case. And again, with every rock I turn over, I find more and more malfeasance by the Biden administration, which was bending over backwards to cover up Biden's malfeasance. So that's what started me writing the book. And the level of, I think any reasonable person could look at the 2 cases and just see on their face that there was not equity between the 2 cases. Here Biden is with 50 years worth of classified documents in his house. Basically, it's a crime spree that went on for half a century,
Yeah.
and he's not charged with anything. And meanwhile, Trump was president. There's no allegation that he even knew what was in the boxes that got sent to Mar-a-Lago, but he's facing 40 felonies and 140 years in jail. Now, anybody could see right on the face of it that that's not fair. But what most people could never see is the level of deviousness that went into covering up Biden's malfeasance and turning Trump's conduct into a crime. And that's what kind of motivated me to write my book, because I realized I'm one of the only people in the world who can see through all the BS and just give people the truth to show them what was done here. It took me 2 years to research and write it, and I didn't do it for fame or fortune. I spent my whole life down in the shadows, and I would have been happy to stay there. But I just had a story to tell, and I felt like there's got to be people out there who care about the truth still. And 95% of the mainstream media is just propaganda and not interested in giving people the truth. So that's what motivated me to put pen to paper and to just start writing.
It's I'm just trying to think of like any other way kind of to explain it. And the only thing I can even come close to is in Ben Rich's book Skunk Works, obviously the super classified part of Lockheed Martin. He talks about when they first started developing the F-117 stealth fighter. And it was like the first like truly stealth thing where it had the radar cross section of a ball bearing. And when he went to pitch it to the Pentagon and, it got going, his predecessor, Clarence Kelly Johnson, the guy who oversaw the creation of the SR-71, and he kind of had groomed Rich to be his successor. And under Ben Rich, you have the F-117. Um, the Pentagon's just they're up there like this is insane because Ben Rich would go to the Pentagon, he would he would famously bring a ball bearing and he'd roll it across the table and say that's the cross section of this bomber. And this is incredible. We're going to do it. It's gonna be great. And they come in and they slap a SAP Special Access Program on it in addition to funding. Ben Rich this is his first big win. He's like, I made it. I'm getting the respect I feel. And his predecessor, I think the exact quote was, "Ben Rich, you dumb shit." He was saying like you don't know what a special access program is. And they go into just like, yeah, you go to the bathroom, you have two guards sign out and you shut the thing. You're like, dude, I'll be back in 30 seconds. And nope, spin the vault shut, close it, chink, and come back in. All right, now I'm back in. Right, two witnesses, Tommy's back in, sign in. You're like, God, like, and I'm like, so you're drinking coffee. You're like, I have to go to the bathroom again in an hour. And it's armed guard, shut the thing, Faraday, and just for like the parts that aren't even special, like the tire. It's like an off the shelf tire, and it's like no classified, fingerprints, and you're like, but it's at that point it was you can't reject it. Um, so the only way I could even if I just had to play devil's advocate and defend these, which I don't, I think all those people are demons from hell who intentionally abuse their power. The only explanation, if I had to, would be in addition to gross negligence or nefariousness, treasonous activity, you would maybe have people try to avoid even getting something classified in the first place for just the human avoidance of like, yeah, I don't want to do extra work. Like I get that. Like I would identify with that. If somebody was like, Tommy, your podcast is taking off, it's getting bigger than ever, but you got a fingerprint login every time you want to do a show or make a thumbnail for I might be a little more like, hey, let's not make it classified. Not because I'm a Russian agent, but because I'm like, dude, I'm already late to my own show. Like can't be running upstairs tucking in my shirt and then have like an armed guard be like, "Are you Thomas Patrick Harrigan?" And be like, let me in. That's the only and I don't even really believe it because even with Ben Rich, Clarence said, "You dumb shit," and he kind of went, "Yeah, I know." And then he goes, "But I understand why it's classified," and they just go forward. So that's not even a valid argument because they said this sucks, and then went forward with it anyway. And the rest is history. Same with the B2 Spirit. But that's like the only possible defense I could imagine is people just not wanting to classify something that should be classified simply because it's like It's like when the cop lets you go for speeding. It's not always because he's like a cool guy, or maybe it is. It might just be it's Friday and he's like, dude, if I have to go, I have to go back to the station and write out man, I'm going to the bar. Like I'm watching the game. Hey man, give me that ticket, rip it off. Hey, you both win. What do you care? It's but that's like the only thing I could imagine would be preemptively. But I guess I'm kind of voiding my own argument because if somebody did that, then they wouldn't be by not classifying it, they wouldn't be containing classified information. So I don't think that argument
Yeah,
even
and
works.
I go into this in my book because this is frequently misunderstood. Um, let's say you're a government employee, you have a security clearance, and you're writing a document, a memo.
Yeah.
And the memo contains classified information, but you miss it and you don't properly classify the document. So there's either no markings on it at all or it's marked unclassified. Well, that doesn't declassify the information. It doesn't even mean that the document's not technically classified. What it means is that the document is classified, but you just didn't properly mark it. And if that document goes out into the public domain, the government will refuse to confirm or deny the accuracy of the document, and they will continue to classify the information that's in the document because it's always been classified. You didn't have the power to declassify it. You just made a mistake.
Mm.
And the government does not honor mistakes like that. And you can see why, right? You can't let a mistake drive a declassification.
Yeah.
So we've had to make this argument many times in courts because people will come in under something like the Freedom of Information Act and they'll say, I should have the right to get that information. The government can't claim this is classified. I just read it in the Washington Post last week. Well, that's when we would file something with the court, in the court alone, saying, yeah, maybe that is true, but it was classified then. It's still classified. And just because it was leaked to the Washington
Doesn't
Post
make it. Yeah.
doesn't mean that it's now declassified and we have to honor it in every other context. And the courts understand that argument.
Yeah.
So look at let me give some more granularity on Biden's conduct because this has not gotten the press that it deserved. Biden had classified documents all over his house. The first level den, the third level den, an office off of his bedroom, his private office, the foyer, the garage. There were classified documents all over his house. Now, some of those were in boxes, but even the boxes, it was evident that people had opened them and rummaged through them. Some of the documents he had were in his personal library, in a filing cabinet. Some of the files had his handwriting on them. There is no doubt that this man knew that he had classified documents in his house, and he'd had them for a time span of 50 years, right? Going all the way back to the 70s, some of the classified documents he had. And at one point, this was after Biden left the vice presidency. So it's February of 2016, 2017. Um, Biden's talking to a ghostwriter who's going to write Biden's second book. And the ghostwriter is recording the conversations to assist him in writing the book. And at one point, Biden's coming up from the basement. And according to the special counsel, you can clearly hear Biden say, I just found all the classified stuff downstairs. Now, in any other case, a prosecutor would be calling that a taped confession, and it would be the star piece of evidence because it showed that Biden knew he had classified in the house, and he did nothing about it because he never attempted to return all the classified stuff he just found downstairs. Um, Instead, the special counsel just found ways to excuse the tape and the confession. And this is what got all the publicity from the special counsel report, which is called the Hur report, because this is where he said Biden's memory was so bad by that time that a reasonable juror could find that he would have immediately forgotten that he just found all the classified stuff after he had just found it. Now, remember, this is February of 2017. This is 3 years before Biden even became the president. And the special counsel was saying Biden's memory was so bad, even back then, that he could have immediately forgotten what he had just found down in the basement. So, and I think the special counsel realized how weak that was because he layered on all these other potential defenses of reasons not to use this taped confession or rely upon it. And one of them was that it was too succinct. He literally said that it was a mere, he described it, this is his language, as a mere 8-word utterance that a jury might not pay much attention to. Well, I just killed him is just 4 words. But I can guarantee you that if a prosecutor had a tape recording of a defendant in a murder case saying, I just killed him, that they wouldn't be dismissing that as too succinct of an admission. But that's what they did in Biden's case. It was just a mere 8-word utterance. Oh, and they also said Biden was prone to loose talk with his ghostwriter. So, who knows what was really going on there? There was just loose talk. It's really unbelievable the extent that the special counsel and DOJ went to dismiss what was a taped confession. So that's Biden's conduct, right? He had over 100 classified documents in his house, and he had some in a private office of his in downtown DC. Many were at the top secret level. And this is interesting. To this day, we don't know the overall volume. Even the special counsel report never tells the American public the overall volume, even though that is one of the primary factors DOJ is supposed to consider in deciding whether or not to prosecute these types of cases. The most the special counsel says in the report is that the volume was not small. Well, 50 is not small, 500 is not small, 5,000 is not small. But to this day, we don't know, and we may never know, the total amount of classified documents that were found in Biden's possession, which is kind of unbelievable, but that's true.
It does almost rationally, you have to apologize. I'm downtown, you hear sirens going all the time. Um, but it also it makes sense that this is where we are. And by that I mean whenever I don't know, whenever you make that level of class, and I'm not some doe-eyed naive like, yeah, the government should, every day should post it. No, there are real things, there are real classifications like nuclear weapon, readiness, or bioweapons research, or like, I get it. I told like there is real classification. I've had on Delta Force guys, Dev Group, Ground Brain, like I get it. But it also kind of makes sense that wherever you want to put the starting line, I guess we could say with Truman and the National Security Act, or even a couple years prior with the Manhattan Project, whenever you make something, whether it's a physical space or it exists just like it's a legal space, it's not a real room, but it's a legal, you could almost say like top secret SCI is like it's not a physical place, but just whatever the now for the example, that when you make something that is so exempt from oversight, and even if the intention really is, hey, we're building the nuclear bomb to end World War II. There's 80 million people dead. Like, yeah, okay, sure, I get it. We're sending in Delta Force to go do XYZ, or there's a suitcase nuke in Manhattan, or whatever. And it's that classified and it's that siloed and fragmented and for the express purpose of it not being leaked, right? You don't want somebody to walk in and just, you know, like Dr. Strangelove, and you take a picture of the war room. Like, I get it, and you want to fragment it so no one has all the pieces. You don't want something like the Rosenbergs, or Klaus Fuchs defecting with apparently the Manhattan Project wasn't classified enough because Stalin knew about it at Yalta or whichever one it was. When you make something that secret and siloed and fragmented and just in the shadows of the shadows of the shadows, it does make sense though that that would, in time, be it a week, be it 80 years, that is where the fermentation and brewing of the subversion of a free and open society would come from. It eventually, if you flip the coin enough times, nefarious actors are going to use the exempt from everything. Well, eventually, someone's going to use that for, well, no one's going to catch me with these documents because they officially don't exist. And what can I
Yeah,
do with
yeah,
that? I mean, what was
yeah.
Hanson's motive? He just wanted more money. Like
You know, I
that's the most basic thing. Yeah, sorry. But that's my kind of observation just from all of it is eventually it makes sense that that is where the monster would be hatched, right? And
yeah,
where else would it be?
and look, our founding fathers recognized this.
Hmm.
That's why they dispersed power and put
Yeah.
so many checks and
Or
balances. They
beware
knew that,
foreign entanglements. Like they
yeah,
saw it. They knew where it eventually would go.
and they knew human nature is that even the most well-intentioned of people
Yes, it's
can't resist wielding the power that they've been given to achieve what they see as a just end. And in doing that, will justify any means to achieve that end. Washington said this in his farewell address in 1796 that it is a human nature to move towards tyranny, and that's why the government was created the way it was created, to dissipate the power and to put checks and balances in, because it's just human nature. It's ingrained into our DNA. And so, in my book, even though my focus is on the current cases against Biden and Trump on the classified documents, I trace the unlawful targeting of Trump all the way back to 2016. And what's interesting is that back then, the FBI was using domestic intelligence collection authorities to target the Trump campaign. It's exactly as you were saying. They were using those powers that they can wield in the dark. They're very powerful things, very powerful means to target people and to collect, their emails, phone conversations, and so forth. Uh, and that's where it started, right? Because they couldn't resist the temptation to use these very strong powers that have relatively little oversight because it's all done in the shadows, under the rubric of intelligence collection. And so it's like back then they at least had the decency to try and hide their conduct. Where you move forward in the unlawful targeting of Trump, just getting more and more aggressive, up to the point that they raid his home, Mar-a-Lago, with 30 armed FBI agents who
mm,
are authorized to use
authorized to kill.
deadly force. I mean, that's a pretty strong sign of how far off the abyss you've gone.
Hmm.
And then they indict Trump for 40 felony counts when he did absolutely nothing illegal. Um, so, at that point, the FBI and DOJ are openly acting as an enforcement arm of the Democratic Party. Openly. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. And that's particularly fascinating to me when you look at how it all evolved from 2016. At least they're trying to hide their conduct all the way up through today where they don't even bother.
Mm. Yeah, that is. And then there's kind of two takes on that. Is it that their power is so absolute that they no longer care? Or, and this is what I hope, is that it's fraying so quickly that they're just going for it. They're going for the total coup. It's like, they're robbing the bank and they just notice somebody did the silent alarm. It's like, all right, now balls out. Take the silencers off. Is it because, if you go in with like an entire if I went into like the local Bank of America guns blazing without being stealth, you could say I'm desperate, or it could be that the power's so overwhelming. It's like bank security guards versus it's like me in an Abrams tank. You'd be like, yeah, I don't think he's desperate. I think that's just overwhelming firepower, right? Or it's, you start getting sloppy because you're desperate and now you know that your minutes are numbered and you got to get out with what you can. And I don't think we can know which one it is. Is it because they are so confident and cocky in their power? Or is it because it's sliding away and now they're all kind of fleeing the ship and becoming increasingly erratic, increasingly sloppy? It's bottom of the 30th inning. Everybody's tired. I don't know which one it is. And it also does make me think of, and this is more, I guess, just kind of philosophical, but if the natural human state seems to be towards tyranny, is it that, it's like you never fix all, like a human never fixes all of their own flaws in their life. What you try to do is, be a better father than even if your dad was great, you try to be better, right? You try to more opportunity, or maybe your dad's an alcoholic and you're like, I'm not going to be that guy. You always right, and then grandpa always dies, and there's like some traumas or something, and then but then next generation, you try to be somewhat better, and no one ever like completely balances it out, but over decades, same thing with like progress, right? It doesn't over decades and centuries. It's like, yeah, no, slavery is not a thing now. Like, you can't do that, right? Or it's just no, it's not the 1950s. You can't crack your wife in the kitchen for you're gonna get arrested, and it happens very slowly over time. And I talked to Brigadier General Robert Spalding about this because he writes a lot about China. He was in Obama's National Security Council. Our countries or empires, are these just that like the next level? Like, so a human life is, whatever, 70, 80 years. Are our countries and hegemons, do they move the world forward or backwards? But most of the time they move it somewhat forward. And then they do hit a point where it almost seems inevitable. You should look at all of human history where the empire becomes so large and the military becomes so thin spread and the corruption and the decadence becomes, not to sound like some Marxist, but it becomes so opulent that, and one of my favorite quotes is from this fiction book, but it's a guy going, the pyramids were built with rye soup and the whip. Rome died in the baths, right? I mean, you work hard and hard men, great, whatever. Is this just the natural state of human history? But instead of it happening over 50 years, we see it happen over 500 years to where an empire grows, it becomes great. People from all over the world try to move there. You build a better life. It moves technology forward, either the wheel or the wooden ship or stained glass windows or, cathedrals or, America, you could say we did a heavier than air flight in the internet, like in A bombs. Like, right, that's a pretty cool thing. And is it reaching a point now where it'll fall and then something like China will take over and it could be awful. It could be that China's awful. I guarantee you they'll still make some progress with like computer chips. And then in 500 years, they'll, whatever, China will fall apart and the empire after that, Indian empire or, Mexican or whatever. And this is again kind of way beyond the scope of your book, but is that kind of the natural end state where it becomes so good you work so hard. The republic is the balances of powers are so checked, and the economy is so free and flourishing, and you have such a strong military and intelligence community that the amount of money available and the size of the industry, a military industrial complex, the amount of classifications, SAPs, USAPs, it becomes so bloated and corrupt that it's the natural end state for it because how else would it end? Like, by the biggest military ever is the one that would also become the most corrupt because you had the most classifications. And the ones that
Yeah.
don't become that corrupt were probably, I doubt, like, you know, I don't know. I doubt the Ethiopian intelligence communities are necessarily like pulling the strings behind world economics, but it's also, you're also, no one knows about them. So it's I don't know, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Petraeus or whatever, or, Tiger Woods getting chased by his mistress. Like, that is that like the end state to achieve greatness? It also means you're probably going to go down like a flaming 747. I don't know if any of that word salad made sense,
No,
but
it does, and it does also touch upon some of the themes in my book. So, for instance, I write about the fact that you know the federal government has gotten larger than anyone thought it would, and the federal bureaucracy within the executive branch is large. And so I describe it as basically, it's like it's not a monolithic entity. It is a series of fiefdoms and kingdoms, and sometimes they work together. Sometimes there's, they're warring with each other. Sometimes there are marriages of convenience. It's a series of fiefdoms and kingdoms, and I describe it as being kind of like Game of Thrones without the bloodshed, but more scheming and maneuvering. That's the reality of what the federal bureaucracy is, and because of that, there are those elements of the bureaucracy that people often refer to as the deep state, and I think there is something like that. And but where I see it is that, in my mind, the deep staters, they're not elected officials. These are the people that you don't know because they're bureaucrats and they spend their life in the state, working in the government. And because of that, in moving up the ranks, they can acquire great power within the federal bureaucracy. And they are not elected officials. And if they don't keep themselves in check, if they can't resist the temptation to use their power to achieve ends that in their mind is justified, that's when the problems occur. And that's what has happened with an FBI and the DOJ. Career people who know the system and know how to manipulate it, right? They can make things happen. They can stop things from happening because they know where to put the pressure within the bureaucracy. That is what happened from 2016 forward in targeting Trump within the FBI and DOJ. I mean, the FBI leadership was wiped out. Comey was fired. The deputy director, Andrew McCabe, fired, right? Lead investigator, Pete Strzok, fired. Lead counsel, Lisa Page, fired. And all for unlawful and ethical conduct. They should have been prosecuted, all of them, as well as being fired. But that is the level of the corruption that has occurred within our federal law enforcement, and it's political bias in these cases, right? These are people who could not resist the temptation to use their power to achieve a political end, protecting Clinton, protecting Biden, while going after Trump and bending laws well past the breaking point to try and make Trump's conduct illegal, to take him off the board, to politically assassinate him. That's what I saw happening in my research. My book is not a rant. It's not histrionics.
Nope.
Any criticism I level, and I level many against the Biden-Harris administration and the Democratic Party, I back it all up with the facts. And if I didn't have the facts, I didn't make the criticism. And so what's particularly fascinating for me is not just that this happened, right? This unlawful targeting of Trump that has escalated and escalated to the point of raiding his house and indicting him for 40 felonies when he did nothing wrong. The most fascinating thing is that half the country's okay with it. Half of our country just shrugged their shoulders and said, yeah, it's probably not right, but it's Trump, so it's
It's
okay.
Orange Man.
And it just blew my mind that people could be that cavalier about tyranny because they've come to have so much hatred in their hearts. And so I tried to look at this from a psychological perspective. How could it be? I mean, this is America where people are supposed to care about these things. How could it be that half the country not only doesn't care, but they're cheering it on and want more of it? Yeah, get Trump, get the orange man, anything you got to do. And I traced it back again, back to 2016, where all the polls showed Hillary as a shoo-in. She was all my friends and neighbors and family members, they were all planning the coronation, hanging the buntings. It was a done deal. And then the Grinch came along and stole the election in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of just picking themselves up and brushing themselves off and saying, okay, well, let's figure out what we did wrong and we'll do better in 4 years, they didn't do that. The Democratic Party elites, when their members were down and these people were in deep despair, and what they did then was, while these people were laid low, they fed them a constant diet of hatred and violent rhetoric. And they got hooked on it. They got hooked on the hate, and they need their fix, and they have to get Trump. It's a psychological thing, and I see it. I see it because most of my friends and family and neighbors are Democrats, and I relate, real life stories. of talking to these people, from 2016 forward, and how just crazed they became and how they needed the hatred and they're hooked on it. And that persists to this day. Um, yeah, go ahead.
No, keep going. I'm just
Yeah, and so, again, it started in the shadows using intelligence collection mechanisms to target Trump's campaign. And then they moved on, right? They went after General Flynn with trumped up charges. The man did nothing wrong. Then they went after, what was his name? Roger Stone, right? A
Mhm.
confidant of Trump's. When the FBI raided Stone's house, it looked like the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
And this was an elderly man with no priors and no history of violence. I mean, that shows again ratcheting things up. And then we had, the impeachment hoaxes. Of course, what I call the Russia collusion hoax coup, and then the persecutions, and then the impeachment hoaxes, and then the J6 Kangaroo Court Committee. Just one thing after another to try and politically assassinate Trump. And when they couldn't get him politically, they created conditions that could permit a physical assassination. And I'm not making this up. Again, this is not hyperbole. If anyone hasn't checked it out, do a search on H.R. 8081. That's a bill that was introduced into federal Congress by Benny Thompson, who's a senior Democrat, and other Democrats. He chaired the J6 Kangaroo Court Committee. And after he failed to politically assassinate Trump, he introduced H.R. 81, a bill that, if it became law, would have stripped Trump of his Secret Service protection. That was the purpose
That
of a
is an
bill
assassination
that was
attempt.
introduced into Congress. That is despicable and devious, right? That is an act of
That is
deviance.
that is trying to. Hey, I'm no fan of Obama or Clinton or Bush, but I'm a human. They're presidents. It's just what it is.
And it's their families, right?
Yeah,
Their
yeah. It's
families,
their
their
wife. It's their
children, their
kids. Their
wives.
dad's the president. Yeah, there's someone out there that would love to go grab one of Bush's kids. Why not? It's a point of leverage.
Now, that act of depravity that occurred by the Democratic Party months before the Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt. And then leading up to that attempt, just look at the tweets from Biden.
Oh
Trump
yeah,
is
yeah.
an
It's an existential
existential
threat
threat
to
to
the.
democracy. He threatens everything. Our republic will end if this man gets into power again, blah, blah, blah. Just hate filled, violent rhetoric. And then it was just a few days before Butler
Put
that
him in the
Biden told some of
crosshairs.
his, yes, it's time to put Trump in the crosshairs.
But
A
we don't want anyone to
president,
commit any violence. But by the way,
right?
the
You
nation
know,
the nation you love, the nation your grandparents served in, the greatest generation, the Revolutionary War, it's at stake. And this one man, if he dies, it won't be a problem. But I'm not. No one do anything. But I'm just saying, the root of all of our problems is right there, and he's just a man.
and it shows how devious and depraved people have come that they think that language is acceptable from a president. And Biden wasn't criticized for he apologized for using that language, but then he went on to keep using similar
And
language.
then
And
he apologized like the next day, and then like 48 hours later, he was like, he's the biggest threat to the free world.
still
Yeah,
an existential threat to democracy, though, right? Yeah.
it, it's yeah, it's that's what it is. Is I think the term isn't it stochastic terrorism. You build up the groundswell, and that's what you do. And there kind of is nothing like funnier than like just yesterday, just Trump serving fries at McDonald's. A certain like it. And on one hand, it's just like the most deadly serious thing. It's the national security apparatus of the most powerful nation on the planet trying to kill a guy. And on the other hand, it's not funny that Trump's just at McDonald's serving fries, and it's like the establishment that like whacked Kennedy that starts foreign wars for Trump's just he just no how do you do it crispy salted fry. There is something. I don't know if it's fun. I don't know if this is just like a defense mechanism in my own mind that we're clearly just slowly just inching towards war, but it's not funny that he's just he's Teflon Don, man.
You gotta keep your sense of humor,
You
right?
have
No
to.
matter how bad things get, if you lose your sense of humor, all is lost.
Yeah,
I,
it's divine intervention. I would imagine that there is a contingent of people in the military, the intelligence community that still support him or what he represents, which is, a republic. And, I don't think he's just taking it on by himself. Oh, and if it's not divine intervention and it's not that, I have no idea what it is because he should be dead.
um,
He should absolutely be dead.
it could just be luck.
It
Um,
might just be.
there was a story that when one of Napoleon's generals had sufficiently shown themselves to be superior in their generalship, Napoleon would grant them a baton, which signified that they were field marshals. And when they had that level of rank, they had the ability to make independent decisions on the battlefield, even to commit major resources in ways that had not been previously approved. So
Mhm.
it was a pretty big deal. And there's a story that some of the more senior generals were lobbying, for this particular general to be given a baton and to be given that level of authority and discretion. And they were lauding this general's accomplishments. And Napoleon said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I know all that. What I want to know is he lucky?"
That- all right, that's right. Yeah,
So luck counts.
it. Yeah, I mean, that is a huge part of it. Is just luck. I mean, I think though, and I do think there is, and it's not just optimistic because, and I should touch up on it more. I know a lot of Cold War history, yeah, but I should touch up on like Roman history and that the path we're on right now of corruption and rot and kind of global interventionism, it is a death spiral, but it's not 100% determined. Like you can pull up, and no empires last forever, and I get that. But it can pull up. And if you do pull up, not only do you survive, but you often become stronger than you were before it. In the same idea of, you get sick and you survive it. Now you have an immune system. It might just be my own defense mechanism because I'm 34 and I'm like, well, I don't want to survive through just like, the collapse of a social order. But if Trump does pull it off and not, I don't mean pull it off in some, now the Republicans can use the FBI. No, no, because that's just as bad. If he can pull it off and restore some sort of balance, or at least just free and fair election, or just not openly putting bills for if Trump put a bill forward to strip Biden of his Secret Service, I would be the first out. I would be the first on the show with Secret Service people saying, no, you can't do this. This is awful. I haven't given up entirely. I do think I do think he has a chance. And I'm also not naive. I know he's not an angel, and I know he's not, he's not the white knight coming in, and I get it. But I do think that the spiral can be stopped. I think we can still pull the plane up and kind of
I
level out.
agree. I
Yeah.
agree. And it was important to me, even though my book has many, many criticisms, it was important to me to end it on a positive note and to
Yeah.
make recommendations that are practical, things that could actually work to make things better, to kind of right the ship. Our country's been through a lot,
Hmm.
right? We've had many threats from without and from within, and we've been lucky. We've survived them all. And as you said, in many cases, come out stronger. But we have to recognize that we've gotten off track. And there are certain steps that we have to start taking to get things back because we cannot permit federal law enforcement to continue along the same lines where it's being weaponized against political opponents. And so one of the recommendations I make is, currently the FBI has both domestic law enforcement power and domestic intelligence collection power. Those two powers should never have been co-located
Yeah.
in one federal entity. It's too much power, and too much power inevitably results in tyranny. And
Mm.
so uh, The domestic intelligence portfolio needs to be taken away from the FBI and given to a new federal entity uh, that reports to the Director of National Intelligence, not to the Attorney General. And this is a model that is similar to what is used in the United Kingdom. That's what the Brits have done. When you watch the spy movies like James Bond belongs to MI6. That's their overseas intelligence collection agency.
Hmm.
They have a domestic intelligence agency, that's MI5. And then they have an FBI-like entity, that's Scotland Yard. And so those three obviously have to work together, but the power is dissipated. And I believe that our country would benefit greatly from doing that here.
Yeah.
And then in addition to taking that power away from the FBI, the power for domestic intelligence, the FBI's got a culture problem right now, and that needs to be fixed. And that's going to take time and strong leadership. But they are now, and this is proven, of the ends justifies the means mentality, and you cannot have that in a law enforcement entity, and you cannot have that in the federal government, and that has to be fixed. And that is a very, very difficult thing to do. To change the culture of a large organization takes time and energy and patience. But and even if you don't achieve it, it still has to be attempted. And so
Hmm.
they need to get the right people in leadership over there and start retraining people and adjusting the culture of the FBI.
Hmm.
In addition to that, 98% of criminal cases in America today are resolved at the federal level through plea agreements, right? And this is something that was never anticipated by our founding fathers. Most people wouldn't even know they have a constitutional right to a jury. Um, and there has been no mechanism of oversight over the plea agreement process as a whole. And so this whole process has grown up to be the defining element of criminal prosecution. And yet there was no commensurate oversight mechanism to grow along with the practice. And so some entity needs to be created within the federal government to have oversight over all plea agreements in federal criminal cases. The need for this is obvious. I mean, just look at, all you have to do is read my book and you'll see cases that were egregious in how they were resolved through plea agreements. Look at Hunter Biden's plea agreement in Delaware. Nobody could figure out what that thing was because nobody'd ever seen anything like it before.
Hmm.
It was so egregious. And so that entity, if created, needs to report to the Attorney General because we're still talking about criminal prosecutions. But they could also have a dual reporting obligation to one of the oversight committees in Congress. Now, I can tell you, DOJ and the FBI would absolutely hate this proposal, and maybe that's a sign that it's a good thing. I don't know, but those are two things that are practical and that could happen. And then also, just as a general matter, um, we need to be more careful to the types of people we are appointing to positions of power. And they need to be people who can exercise power cautiously and more thoughtfully. I mean, Merrick Garland has is the most political attorney general in the history of our nation. I mean, he authorized the raid of Trump's home on a very thin legal veneer. And I encourage your viewers to read my book in the chapter
Hmm.
on the raid affidavit, because I'd written hundreds of those types of affidavits explaining classified information to federal judges generally, and then also explaining the specific classified information at issue in the cases. And that FBI affidavit supporting the raid to Mar-a-Lago was a joke. It was a joke, and that raid should have never been approved. And it wasn't just approved. I mean, this was approved by a litany of offices within DOJ, up to and including the Attorney General himself. And I point out many mistakes in the affidavit, and I saw them immediately. It's not like it took me a lot of research. Granted, I have the experience to see them, but it wasn't difficult, which tells me, because I know some of the career people working on these cases, they're still there from when I was working. I know that they know better, which tells me they bowed to political pressure
Hmm.
and permitted laws to be bent past the breaking point just to get Trump. And that's scary.
just to get orange, man. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter because by the time people realize it, it's too late. But any any crackdown or authority or violation of civil liberties that you cheer on because it's done to your political opponents will be done to you. Just
Yeah, and one of the things I've been advocating for in the event Trump gets elected is for him to do just the opposite. Um, the best thing in my mind for him to do is to show mercy to those people who showed him no mercy, right? All those people who went after him unlawfully. I would support investigations so that the American people can get transparency on how devious these things are. Um, but beyond that, I would say, it has to stop. The cycle has to stop, and that takes leadership. And so he could issue pardons to all of them and then just get on with running the country. But have investigations so the American people can see how devious it all was. But then to just move on, run the country, show these people mercy that they never gave you. And that would disarm them, at least the reasonable ones, both of them.
yeah, yeah, both of them. Yeah, I know, right? If even. Um, but yeah, for NF, we've been running about an hour, actually an hour and a half. No, hour and a half. I have no idea. That was awesome. I thoroughly appreciated that, man.
Well,
And
thank you for having me, and I'll
dude,
come back
I'd love
anytime.
to have you back on. That was fun as shit, man. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And no, I mean, I would tell people to go grab the book. You do need to understand what it is you're up against, what where lawfare comes from, where all this sort of tit for tat comes from. It is absolutely a form of warfare. It is nothing less. And I think people do need to at least educate themselves to be coherent on what is going. You don't have to be a soldier, but if you're in World War I, you should understand what a trench is. You should understand what a machine gun is and a gas mask. I'm not saying you're going to survive, but it's a lot better if you know what it is. And that's what I would say is understand what lawfare is. Understand what I guess sort of classification fair is. You at least need to be literate to understand what is going on because it's going on all around us. But again, everybody watching, please go in the description. Please go grab the book. You can get it on Kindle. You can read through it. And Mr. Sweeney, dude, I'd love to have you on again, man. That was fun. You're a cool dude.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll send you this. I'll email you this. We'll schedule another one. Thank you for your time, sir.